Although good circumstances are welcome by all, we all welcome great circumstances, right? But knowing that no matter what the circumstance may be, you can have peace, joy, love, self control, patience, and know that your God is in there with you. He's united with you. Whatever you're going through, He's going through. He relates to us on every level, guys. Remember, He suffered immensely in His earthly life, and He suffers with us, and He rejoices with us, and He mourns with us, and He grieves with us, and He celebrates with us. He's closer to us than our own skin. He's deeper than our own feelings, guys. Our spirits are united, so keep that in mind. And Jesus, as He is saying, He ends it here with, before Abraham, I am. They want to stone Him. They want to kill this guy. So here we are. He escapes. He goes across the Jordan. Now here we are in John chapter 11. We are talking about the death of Lazarus, okay? And we'll get into it here. So John chapter 11, here we go. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So we get that story elsewhere. But this is her brother Lazarus who's ill. And so the sisters sent to Him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Lot said right there, Jesus loves him and yet he's ill. Let's see what's going on. When Jesus heard it, He said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Through it. So He's not causing this illness. And He's saying this illness doesn't lead to death. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God can be glorified through it. So let's keep it up. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So He loved all of them. So when He heard that Lazarus was ill, He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. What's going on here? Then after this, He said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to Him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. We find out Jesus is the true light. You walk in the light, you walk in the day. Today is the day that the Lord has made, right? We will rejoice and be glad. You could just bounce these things off each other on and on and on. Now here's what it says. Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Light, dark, Jesus, right? Remember, the true light that is the light of all mankind, was coming into the world, and the darkness comprehended it not. The darkness could not overcome it. Now, after saying these things, He said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Now, think about this. Think about this, okay? Actually, I'm going to keep on reading, and then we'll dive in here. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to Him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will recover. Now, Jesus was speaking of his death, but they thought that He meant taking rest in sleep. Do you notice how Jesus talks about death compared to how we talk about death? Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So it's for their sake that He's glad He wasn't there. Why? It wouldn't have happened if He was there. But here we go. Lazarus has died. Or, as Jesus calls it, guys, and we need to get this perspective, He has went to sleep. Okay? So Thomas called the twin and said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. See, the disciples, they're going along with it, okay? But I think it's so important to understand that this is how Jesus looks at death. See, a lot of us look at death totally different than how Jesus talks about it. Our physical death is, Jesus refers to as going to sleep, guys. That's how he sees it. In the same way you go to sleep and you wake up, that's what it's like for us when we die. We need to wrap our heads around that. And then actually we should apply that through the rest of Scripture when we see death and dying and stuff like that. Okay, so now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And she said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." This right here, guys, Jesus is the resurrection. Can you wrap that around your head? We probably can't, okay? We think of the resurrection as kind of like this power getting blasted at us when we die, right? But Jesus is the resurrection. It is Jesus himself resurrecting us with his incredible love, which is the power of God, which is the gospel. Okay. Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. And though he die, he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Never means never, guys. Do you believe this? She says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." And when she had said this, she went and called her sister, Mary, saying in private, "The teacher's here, and he's calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and she went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in a place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So they see Mary pop up and run, and they just, they assume she's going to go and cry near the tomb. Now when Mary came to Jesus, where Jesus was, and she saw him, she fell at his feet and she said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died." And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, a stone laid against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So I want to go back real quick, guys. John 11:35 here, Jesus wept. Jesus wept, guys. No one would ever invent the idea of a God who cries. Nobody, if they were going back to rewrite history about this God they made up, would say, yeah, and then he was crying over there with everybody else. God became human and he experienced humanity completely and fully. He didn't block off a part of his brain that was purely God or something like that. It is union here. He was 100% human being, and he felt the emotions, the grief, the sadness. Knowing full well what he was about to do, he related completely to those who were grieving. And it's the same with us. It's the same with us when we grieve our loved ones, when we grieve losses and things like that, knowing that Jesus is going to restore it and make all things right and all things new. He grieves with us. He lives with us. And this is what it means to be human. Guys, don't let... Jesus is the true human. Don't let anybody tell you that crying is weak or expressing yourself is unwelcome. To do so is to be human. How do we know this? Well, the true human, the blueprint, did this. He exemplified this for us. He's not just an example for us, he's an example of us. All right. So anyways, unbind him and let him go, is what Jesus says. Now many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Can you imagine that? Raises a man from the dead, and the religious, the separatists, those who just absolutely refuse to trust in their God-given identity, they go and they tell the religious leaders and the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they tell them what Jesus has done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gather the council and says, "What are we to do? This man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Isn't that interesting? They were threatened by this idea that, hey, if everybody trusts in him, the Romans are going to come and take this over, and we're going to lose our power and position and all that stuff. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." You nailed it right there. And somebody asked me about that yesterday, the Antichrist spirit. But you're right. So here's what it says in the Mirror version, guys. "If we let him alone, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and dispossess us from our land and our national heritage." Feeling threatened rather than endorsed in their core identity, thus missing the entire point of the Messiah's mission, right? Anyone who believes in Jesus recognizes their core, their origin in him, but they didn't believe. So what does that mean? They were threatened. They were threatened. And one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest, said, "You don't know what you're talking about. If you merely reasoned about this, you would have known that it is to our advantage that one should die instead of the entire nation." And he said this without realizing that in the office of the high priest, he was prophesying Jesus' sacrificial death as the scapegoat of the entire nation, right? See, Caiaphas said that without even realizing what he was saying. He's prophesying that Jesus would die for the entire nation. And this was not for Israel only, but in Jesus laying down his life as the true shepherd of mankind, he would lead together into one family all the children of God from wherever they have been scattered, into places and circumstances where they have lost their true identity. His death would bring closure to every lie that mankind believed about themselves, right? That's the destruction and the defeat of sin, believing lies about yourself. Then from that day on, they took counsel to put Jesus to death. Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but he went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. And that wraps John chapter 11.